Hello, welcome to another Whiskey Me live tasting event. Um, we are just going to wait a little. I've got a little echo in the background. I'm just going to fix that while you all load into the room. Okay, that should have fixed that. So, welcome, everyone. We've probably got quite a few new tasters this month from all our new subscribers from Dragon's Den. So, I'm happy to welcome you guys into your first Whiskey Me live tasting. Hope you got your patch of Mannochmore ready and your glass. We're planning on having Colin Dunn, who has been on once before, to join us for this tasting, but unfortunately Colin's not well. So instead we've got his colleague TJ Littlejohn, who is in the green room waiting to come in very shortly. So I'm going to grab him in just a second. Here we go. TJ, welcome, mate. How you doing?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. I'm going to get it out there. I can't believe how good the weather's been this week so far.
Are you just trying to deflect from Scotland's performance in the Euros? Is that what the plan here?
Yeah, that's pretty much the first thing I thought. Let's step away from as far as that's possible. I think as far as to say that it's definitely not coming home for us is probably a good way to describe that. Although, we're one game in. Let's see how Friday night goes, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you're right. The weather has been lovely. It's beautiful, and some would say not great whiskey weather, but I actually think that Mannochmore 12 is a pretty decent dram for this kind of weather, being kind of light and floral and altogether quite spring summery.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. I mean, there's definitely some whiskies, well, in the Diageo portfolio that probably don't lend themselves so well to the hot weather, and they definitely associate themselves with that classic fireplace, winter's day,
Yeah.
wet dog thing. But then when you come to things like Mannochmore that lend themselves to that lighter and more spring summer style, is a really good way to go around it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we'll, I guess, get into talking a little bit about this dram. We'll talk a bit about the distillery itself. I've got a couple of factoids about this distillery. When I was doing the write-up for the blog post, I was doing a bit of research into it, and I mean, it's not a distillery that is on many people's radar, or indeed anyone's radar. It's sort of one of these forgotten operations that kind of ticks along quite happily, producing a lot of whiskey every single year. But we don't see a lot of it bottled as malt. In fact, this is the only sort of official bottling of it, the 12-year-old, which is part of Diageo's Flora and Fauna range. Outside of that, there's just really nothing available apart from the odd independent bottling, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's I say a few independent bottlings. I mean, they rarely come out. I know that Diageo did a special release in
Mm.
2015. There was a 25-year-old which I have died to try and get my hands on, but of course, 25-year-old of from Mannochmore, just there were so few so few bottles produced. Trying to find any is almost impossible. I would say it's gold dust.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I'm really glad that we do have a bottling from it because there were prior to this range, our lovely Flora and Fauna range. There were whiskies that we never tasted.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah, no, I think the great thing about Flora and Fauna is, and we've done Inchgour before from this range. I think we might have done one other Flora and Fauna, and we will eventually work our way through all of them. I think, because a little bit like Whiskey Me, it's just an opportunity to try stuff that you might not normally try. And we should probably say, I mean, this range really is showcasing some of Diageo. I mean, Diageo own what, like 30, 31 distilleries in Scotland, something like that.
yeah. Well, we say 28. Obviously, Port Ellen will reopen. Brora reopened last month. And
Yeah,
then there's the experimental distillery that we don't talk about that is technically a single malt distillery at Cameron Bridge, right? So yeah,
yeah, you said too
31
much.
will be. So yeah, I mean it's great. I mean the Flora and Fauna range for me is such an amazing entity because they're not that expensive, but they
Mm.
have something that's totally different to talk about. And when you look at the whole entire range, or I guess, I don't know how many times you've maybe seen the original range. I've only ever seen it a couple of times of the full. I think there's 26 bottles in total.
Yeah.
Trying to collect that whole entire range is now absolutely impossible. But the ones that still stand, Mannochmore, Blair Athol, Dalyun's one of my favourites as well. It's such a cool range to pull out and give your guests a point of difference, and that's what they were designed for, right?
Yeah, totally. And to showcase, like you say, these distilleries where if the Flora and Fauna range didn't exist, you would literally just be looking at these sort of rare independent bottlings that have, only limited distribution and limited numbers as well. Sometimes, it's just a single cask split into 200 odd bottles. So to have this sort of availability is great. Although saying that, for this month's drop, we bought pretty much every bottle of Mannochmore 12 going. Like, we just couldn't. We stripped every supplier and Diageo themselves out of it. At least, in the stock that was available in that sort of 2-week period when we were ordering. So, for the time being, at least, it's probably one of the rarest whiskies in the country.
So I'm expecting a phone call saying, "TJ, I can't believe you were on Whiskey Me with Tristan tasting one of our whiskies that we know don't have anymore." It's Talsby tea all over again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on the one hand, we've been quite a good customer. And on the other hand, it's sort of a waste of time you promoting a whiskey that Diageo no longer have anything on.
I mean, it will come back pretty quickly, and when you talk about the volume of production we've been doing there for a long period of time, or we upped production about 6 or 7 years ago to 4.5 million liters. I mean, that's a big distillery.
Yeah.
So for those viewers that out there will be more. Like, don't worry about it. It's not, It might just be a little time, thanks to Tristan and Tom and the rest of the Whiskey Me crew for keeping us going. No,
well, it is worth. I've got maps and stuff here. It is worth noting that this is not a small craft operation. Well, although it depends on your definition of craft. I mean, it's crafted in the same way as any other single malt is crafted, but it's not craft if your definition of craft is like a mum and pop operation, where someone's sort of shoveling the malt into the mash tun by hand, because it's much, much bigger in scale than that. So there's a map, which gives us some impression of where it is. So just south of Elgin in the Speyside region there. And,
I mean, it's a pretty popular road there for distilleries, right?
Yeah.
What's the road, the A914? I mean, I used to drive up all the time, right? And on that straight from Craig Ellicky, there's Ben Riach, there's Longmorn, and a couple of others, So it's in the right location as far as I'm concerned when it comes to whiskey, I think. And
it's actually speaking of location, it's actually on the same site as the Glenlossie distillery, isn't it? So it's two distilleries in the same location. Glenlossie being much older, and then Mannochmore being built in the 60s, was it? Late 60s, I think.
I think it opened in 71, so
71.
And I think that when you look at photos of it, you can tell exactly when it was built.
Yeah.
there's no imagination. There was no money in Scotland at the time. Like, look, let's just build it and get it working. And they did that. But in actual fact, I also think that the Stillhouse, I've only managed to peek into it once or twice. When you look at it, it's that like real traditional working distillery, and it'll never look any different. Like, that's how it's going to look forever. And there's a certain part of like romance behind that, I think, where it's going to stay for being quite a new distillery compared to, Glenlossie founding 100 years before that. For this to be built and knowing that it's probably never going to change, it's always going to be like this. I'll be able to take my grandkids there and it'll look exactly the same as that photo that you have. And hopefully it becomes something of a future classic, I guess, is what I'd like to see with Mannochmore,
Well, that may well be the thing, right? I mean, the distilleries that we kind of fetishize now that were built in the early 1800s, the kind of Bowmores of this world with their old warehousing and all that kind of thing. In another 100 years' time, these distilleries built in the 60s, which, that looks like my secondary school.
That looks exactly my secondary school.
And maybe these will look traditional and classic when we get to that stage. But like you say, I mean, I've not visited it. There's no visitor centre, obviously, but it is utilitarian, right? I mean, it's just built to perform a function. There is no embellishment there or anything trying to beautify it. I mean, you could say that sort of functional, style is beautiful in one way, I suppose. But it's everything is there for a reason, and that is to produce whiskey, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you were a Diageo whiskey ambassador long before I was, and you no doubt visited all of our beautiful sites. When you turn up at Lagavulin, it's gorgeous, it's romantic, it's got all this amazing story and history from so many people who have visited there. Oban, which is obviously one of the Whiskey Me sessions you did with Ali, which is a great session. I loved watching that. But when you look at the town was built around the distillery. The distillery was there first. There's that story that kind of goes along with it. Or even, let's take Cardew, for example, our Speyside home for Johnny Walker. That has a whole story behind, like, Helen Elizabeth Cumming, the red bed sheet for the excisemen and taxes and all that story that comes to it. And then once again, you come along to what we find. I mean, the first time I pulled up here, I went, oh, that's not that good looking. And it's one of those things that I've really grown to love. And I think probably by telling people about the Flora and Fauna range, the whiskey itself, why the whiskey range came out and what that was for and who it signified, I think it's all part and parcel of what the whiskey story is. And as you say, in 100 years' time, this is going to be a classic distillery that no doubt is still standing and still producing the same whiskey.
Yeah, let's hope so. What other pictures have I got here?
Unless Whiskey Me keep buying all of the whiskey, then we're going to have to start releasing older ones that we have or something,
Yeah, well, if we get to the point where we really are buying Mannochmore out of stock, then don't worry, I'll build another distillery because I'll have that much money. So that is.
If you really want to you'll then buy it.
Yeah, exactly. So this is like you see this in a lot of distilleries built around this era, but this sort of Star Trek style control panel next to what I assume is the mash tun there, or it could be a wash. It's not. It's mash tun, surely.
Yeah, mash tun it is.
Yeah.
The mash tun's a fair size as well, I think.
Massive by the looks of things. It looks really big.
The washbacks are huge as well. Like 50. They're over 50,000, 54,000 liters, 55,000 liters.
Yeah. So just terminology-wise, just to what we're explaining, a mash tun is where the barley, ground down barley, gets mashed up with water and heated, and then you extract the sugary wort, and then the wort is then sent to the washbacks, which is where the fermentation takes place with the yeast. Do you know how many washbacks there are? How many different fermenters there are, TJ? Any idea?
8. I think eight in total, all about 55,000 liters. So they're a serious size. It's got to be a big operation in order to produce 4.5 million liters of spirit every year. That's a lot.
It is a lot. I mean, like you say, to sort of contextualize that, it definitely puts it, I would say, sort of at light heavyweight kind of level. I mean, there's a 2 or 3 distilleries that produce a lot more than that, but not many besides that. That's significant volume.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a serious amount more than Lagavulin. When you look at what is it? It's almost 10 times the size of Royal Lochnagar. Yeah. It's about 8 times the size of Oban. And those are big whiskies that people have heard of, and then all of a sudden you've got this absolute workhorse that's hidden at the back of one of our other distilleries that no one's ever heard of, and it's producing all of that spirit, and you're like, where does all of this go? Yeah. And I guess that's the story of blends, right? And
so I mean, it does all end up in blends, doesn't it? I was sort of doing a bit of research into exactly what it goes. Apparently, it's famous for going into Dimple. That was a big component of that. I'm assuming it goes into Johnny Walker, since most stuff does, and that's a lot of liquid to not put into Johnny Walker.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably been my journey. I mean, obviously, the infamous Ali Reynolds is currently on paternity leave, so he was our Johnny Walker ambassador, and I've kind of had to try and fill his shoes or fill that void. Big shoes to fill, fantastic guy. Yeah. But it's led me to learn even more about Johnny Walker and kind of like how much whiskey, when you start actually calculating the maths of how much goes into a blended whiskey. What are we on? 19 million 12-bottle cases of Johnny Walker every year at the moment.
Wow.
Like that's a serious amount, and all that whiskey's got to come from somewhere. But I'm really glad that we have, like, the Flora and Fauna range to prove, because I guess when my father's generation, classic Scottish whiskey drinker, right? Blends are rubbish, and we drink single malts because they're better. But yet, 98% of the world's single malt or whiskey was being sold in single malts at that time. But when you get to taste the Flora and Fauna range, which is all goes into blends, you start tasting them. Hold on a minute, this stuff's really good. How is this into? How is this all going into blend? And it kind of started flipping people's idea or their made up mind of, in actual fact, the blends are really good. I mean, it was Johnny Walker that got me into whiskies, and I hate to tell people that, but it's true.
Yeah. No, I think like you say, the Flora and Fauna sort of prove that it's not just these mystery workhorse whiskies that are filling up the bottles of blends, but that they're great malts in their own right. And so all the ingredients in these blends are of high quality. It just so happens that there's certain malt distilleries where there's a really high demand for the malt bottled as malt, and so those distilleries market as brands in their own right. But other ones, they never got that opportunity, or yet haven't had that opportunity. Maybe at some point in the future. Like you say, these are the sort of future old school classics. Perhaps some of these distilleries.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, when you look at the Flora and Fauna range with sort of all the labels being so similar and having an animal on the front representing each of them, and they're all representative of their location, I think is such a great range.
There we go.
Yeah.
What is the one on the front of the Mannochmore?
I like how we both tilted our heads that way. How we look at, and I think that's such a great story and such a great range. And literally, I don't think any of the Flora and Faunas taste the same. Like, they all kind of stand shoulder to shoulder, and the last tasting note of one leads into the tasting note of another, and so on and so on. And then you get right the way down to like big punchy Dao Yuans and things,
Which is, I guess, what makes them so great for blenders, right? Because as a blender, you want a sort of broad palette of flavors to be able to play with, to compose that blend together. You don't want all your whiskies to taste the same. You need, floral, you need fruity, you need grassy, you need smoky, and then you kind of bring it all together to create that blend with that balanced flavor profile.
Exactly, and I don't really know how to kind of describe, like, the Flora and Fauna range. I kind of feel are a bit like the cement in a building, because Johnny Walker, we talk about our four, I say four corner distilleries, our four main distilleries, but within those, when you say there's 30 different whiskies that go into Black Label, we only talk about 4 of them, so there has to be something really, really big that goes into those to try and create all those amazing flavors. And that floral note that comes from Mannochmore is something that makes it so unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, let's try and identify that floral note. Should we taste it?
Absolutely. I have to say, I absolutely love these packs. The first time I saw them properly was in that vending machine in Black Rock, and I was like, they're so cool. Like, the whole idea, everything is amazing. And I know that you guys have obviously recently gone through a big development or a big change, I'd say. So, congratulations on that. I know you guys put a lot of work into that, and I can imagine standing in front of Dragon's Den with a couple of little pouches must have been quite daunting.
Yeah, just turning up with our pouches and going, "Here you go, is this good enough?" But yeah, it was daunting, and it has been a hell of a roller coaster ride. But it's good. Things are
now you're
good.
Buying all of the whiskey that's available in the country. Pretty cool.
Yeah. And new pouches now as well, which a new design. So these labels, I think we've kind of communicated it on the website through blog posts. On your online shop also communicates it, and even the holding card on this tasting communicates it too. But all these labels are color coded now, and this one's purple. Purple happens to mean floral. So what we've done is every whiskey we send out now, be it part of the Scotch whisky subscription or the world whisky, will have 1 or 2 colors on the background here, and the color just indicates what kind of flavor profile roughly the whiskey fits into. Of course, nothing fits perfectly into one flavor profile. If it did, it would probably be a bit one-dimensional. But it just gives some idea of the sort of style of jam you're going to get. So we separate that out into, I'm going to get this wrong now, spice, sweet, smoke, fruit, fragrance, and balance, which is exactly the same way that we sell whiskey at Black Rock, our whiskey bar in London, by separating whiskey by flavour. So these when you get your whiskey through now, once you get to know the colour coding, from a quick glance, you should know, before even looking at the 3 tasting notes, roughly what this whiskey is going to taste like.
I guess you've proven that the color coding works really, really well to identify with people with your menu at Black Rock and things. Because when you walk, people kind of know that. I know that a lot of our blending team use colors because they associate color with flavor. So the whole thing seems to make sense really, really well. And Tristan, I don't doubt you probably created that and then came to Diageo and said, "I've got an idea. Here's a flavor wheel." If it was you, I wouldn't be surprised. So mastermind behind it all.
Yeah, do you know what? You're right though. That colours and flavours do have a certain association with them for sure. Like there are certain colours, like red. I guess people think of as being sweet and so on. We have to be careful in a way, I suppose, but being careful not to be too suggestive, so as to be sort of prescriptive of what these whiskies taste like. So this is going to be floral, and then it tastes, lo and behold, it tastes floral, because that power of suggestion is quite strong. And of course, we want people to be able to experience these whiskies as objectively as possible, insofar as that is possible when you come to taste something.
I think that's such a great way to do it as well. And I don't doubt that in your time you worked at a number of whiskey shows.
Yeah.
And as much as I love working at whiskey shows, and I think that they're so much fun, you get to interact and meet so many amazing people, there's always someone who rushes into taste and then turns to someone else and says, "Oh, I taste this." And all of a sudden, the second person tastes it and they go, "Oh, yeah, I get that too." And they never get a chance to make up their own mind.
Yeah.
And as we're about to obviously do a tasting, talk about flavour notes so that everyone who's tuning in obviously gets the same flavour as we are. But I think
exactly. We're about to make up the minds of 47 or 46 people. One of them just switched off.
They'll come back once they've done their tasting.
One of them's just realised the absolute sort of fallacy of online tastings, that in actual fact it's just all about the power of suggestion, and they have now logged off to their last ever online whiskey tasting.
And there'll be an official letter written to Whiskey Me and to Diageo saying Tristan and TJ should never ever do a tasting ever again, because it's a waste of time for many others. I don't believe that. I think online tastings, I'm so glad. No, the way that we as an industry have utilized the time that we've had over the last year to connect with people by doing this has been amazing. I don't think that prior to the beginning of last year, I was as comfortable doing tastings online. And now I love it. Yesterday, I was doing a tasting with the brand ambassadors who work in the airport in Oman. And I was like, I'm sitting here doing a tasting with these guys they're literally just finished their lunch, and I've just woken up, and you're doing these tastings with amazing people around the world, which is fantastic. But anyway, enough of that.
You know what? We have time. I mean, just to summarise your point, because it's a good point. We started doing these tastings as a response to lockdown, and they've been a real hit. And now, of course, it's just a standard feature, although we're still kind of locked down. But you're right. First of all, the reach you can have, like sort of geographically, the fact that you can connect with people and no one needs to leave their home is incredible. And of course, the number of people that you can reach. You're not limited by the size of a bar room or a seminar room or anything like that. It's the sky's the limit, or the bandwidth's the limit. So they are a fantastic way of doing things, and I think even the software that we use now is becoming so much more sophisticated, and we're hoping to do more and more with our live tastings each month, where we can start bringing more video into it, more guests. Our tasting on Thursday, by the way, for Sailor's Home, the Haven, the World Whiskey tasting, which is 8 p.m. And we've got 2 guests coming on that one, the owner of Sailor's Home, Kian, and then the master blender, Jack. So there's going to be a bit of a 3-way going on. So, this is, it is a great medium for a brand like ours, especially. We're enjoying doing it.
being able to connect with so many different people as well. I saw that you had Alistair Smith from Glen Scotia on one of them, or he'd done a tasting for Glen Scotia Victoriana, and things like that. Which when I was kind of having a bit more of a look through at some things that I watched and things, and he's such an amazing guy, and I think that there's a lot of people in the industry who have probably been hidden and haven't really been given that opportunity. Because I mean, getting anywhere from Campbelltown or Isla or Skye to come to these shows is so hard. Whereas we get to showcase all of these fantastic people, and I, as a brand ambassador, am forever asking, our distillery managers or an operator or a cooper if they can come along and join us and talk about what they do with Scotch whisky and that little added extra influence they have. I mean, I always make that joke that I'd love to have, a distillery operator, a blender and a cooper have a three-way and say, right, the three of you argue which one of you actually makes whiskey. And I haven't got all three of them in a room yet, but every time I go to one of our cooperage, they turn around and say, no, we're the ones who make whiskey. But then distillers are like, we're the ones who make whiskey. And of course, blenders, where would we be without them? So it's interesting. Maybe there's a reason why we don't get all three of them together.
You think there's a reason?
Yeah, well, probably this argument would kick off and
you'd just go on forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And then coopers are absolute brutes of men throwing barrels around like they're 2p pieces.
You don't want to mess with the cooper.
No, absolutely not.
Right, come on, let's taste it. So I actually had a little taste before we started, as is customary here at Whiskey Meat Hours, just to get the ball rolling. And I hadn't tasted it for a couple of months at least. And what surprised me is, first of all, it is floral. I mean, to identify a certain type of flower in there, I think it's quite tricky, but perhaps a little bit of violet. But it just has this, it's sort of fruitiness that goes beyond fruity and starts to sort of turn into this sort of floral characteristic for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about a few of our other distilleries, I mean, we talk about Glenkinchie being floral, but it seems like this is a totally different style of floral. If that makes
totally.
sense. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think it's not really a flavour that we normally talk about within whiskey being floral. And I guess that's the old traditions of whiskey wanting to be manly and a man drink, whereas now it's a whiskey's for everyone. And if you like whiskey, you're one of us. Come and join us, which is great. And I think that's probably opened us up to talking about different flavours easier, rather than always wanting to be one of those big, like I say my father's generation talking about whiskey, and the flavours were always really similar. They would never talk about the gentle tones. They would always want to talk about the big leathery notes. And you're like, hold on a minute, there's some amazing gentle whiskies out there that have, when you take light citrus, and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I'm really glad that I maybe got a bit more of a sophisticated palate. But yeah, that violet's definitely prominent.
It's almost, I mean, I don't even know if floral is the right term. It's perfumed, I think, is possibly a better term, because it has these floral top notes, but then there's obviously the wood that comes through as well. But even the wood on it, for me, has this sort of, floral, almost, I'm trying to think of the way to describe it, but it's got this sort of mystique about it. It's got a muskiness, like, it's a really perfumed type of wood note to it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think that it's like a sharp flavour. I would say it's more mellow and misty, I guess, is a really good way to...
Yeah, nice, yeah. All right, I'm going to taste. And I find it quite dry on the palate. I don't know if that's just me.
It's definitely like dryness. I guess that I get like a hint of citrus kind of coming in as well, and that dry citrus tone that kind of goes together, which is great. I guess it's that sort of a dry. I was going to say dry woodiness, which is a really strange way to describe it. And I guess there's been a few whiskies in my day that I've probably felt like licking plywood. But fortunately, this is a little bit more mellow than that and a little bit more inviting. And I wouldn't say it was like overly warm.
No, I wouldn't either. And also, I mean, it's fairly youthful as well. I mean, 12 years old. not, I mean, a lot of this would depend on the casks, of course, but
Mhm.
it's still got quite a lot of youth, which I think is another thing really from the Flora and Fauna range that you want to see. If you're only going to get one expression from this distillery, you're not going to want it to have too much wood on it. Otherwise, what's the point?
I think that the whole entire range has been done really, really well like that. I mean, yeah, okay, Dal Yuan's a little bit older at 16, but the rest of them are all the 10, 12, 14.
Yeah.
And I think that forever we've talked about, old whiskey is better. But when they start losing that distillery characteristic, that's when I start kind of falling out of love with them. And when you can kind of like imagine standing in the distillery and all those flavors that are going on, when you pick up that glass, those flavors are still there, which I think is the best part. It's for me, that glass of whiskey should transport you to the distillery, and you should be able to have flavors, and that's what I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Wood is a sort of double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, at the earlier stages of the whiskey's life, it's essential. You need it there because it changes the flavors that are present within the dram. It adds new flavors. It mellows. It rounds off. It harmonizes with the flavor of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, when a lot of that work's done, then it starts to become all-encompassing, and after a long time, it sort of homogenizes. Really, I mean, all whiskies start to taste the same if left long enough in wood, and while you might like that wood flavor, and sometimes old whiskey is nice, especially in the right set and setting, it removes the identity of the whiskey, which removes a lot of the interest and intrigue around the malt whiskey category at that point.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think for me, I've always found that there's a number of older whiskies that really stand out at older ages. But I've always found that whiskies, I probably am more sensitive to whiskies that are overaged, and the reason for that is they start losing that distillery characteristic. Or I would love to taste the new make of this and kind of see what it's like, because I can imagine it's going to be really sharp, really fruity. That citrus floral note will be really, really prominent. And that's what will carry through when it starts to mellow and after it's been aged. Which is
I just added a bit of water to it. In fact, quite a lot of water, more than I intended on adding. Probably about 50% more water than there was whiskey in the glass, and it really becomes citrusy actually on the nose. Then I get like sort of a little bit of like, I guess, kind of orange soda or lemon soda, lemonade, something like that, lemon and orange.
I think it's quite zesty.
It is.
Which is kind of I guess it's so unique when you start talking about whiskies that have that a citrus forward, and I think that's what makes Mannochmore so unique. What are there now? We say 128 single malt distilleries in Scotland, right? Or give or take, with a number of few that have popped up in gin distilleries that are becoming whiskey distilleries and whatnot. But I still think that like Mannochmore is really, really unique in its own right, and there's not many other that really taste like that.
I think also it's it's going back to your point about it being zesty. I think that's such a good description for it, because not only does it smell of these citrus fruits, it's in the taste. It's got this sort of just slight astringency or bitterness to it, as if you're zesting orange zest or lemon zest straight into your mouth.
Exactly. And I think that's that kind of like a little like you've caught a little bit of pith whilst you're zesting.
There you go.
And it's got bitterness. And I think it's great like that. And not that I should come on a whiskey me and talk about making whiskey cocktails, God forbid, but I think that there's some really, really, really good drinks that would lend itself to this, and not necessarily drinks that we would probably traditionally idealize as having whiskey drinks. Like a Mannochmore Old Fashioned for me wouldn't work.
I agree.
But then let's go into, I guess, things around like a whiskey sour, for example. Yeah, okay. I've just said drinks that aren't typical whiskey drinks. I meant the stirred down and brown style, and things that are probably that citrus forward, big like egg white, nice big dash of bitters on top, and that floral whiskey note would really carry through and give you a totally different style of drink, which would be amazing.
I've got to assume it would work well in a highball as well, being citrusy and floral. I think just soda water straight up with ice, not straight up with ice, straight up in a glass with loads of ice.
Yeah, Absolutely. I mean, I think that's probably where I'm going to be straight off to do that after. It's been a while since
Yeah,
I've had a Mannochmore and soda.
it's right
But
the weather for it as well, isn't it? Nice evening for a Mannochmore and
oh,
soda.
absolutely, absolutely, and you know, a lot of mixing happening with whiskey now, and I absolutely love that we're getting more creative and pushing our boundaries in that a lot more. I mean, I guess we always have, and Tristan, I guess you always have with your whiskey career, but moving into flora and fauna and cocktails is something that's never really been said before. Like, what do you do with that? But
Yeah.
there's amazing flavors that go on. But I found myself drinking. Well, it was a black label and soda, Johnny Walker Black Label Highball, that got me really into whiskey, because I realised that in actual fact you can not break the flavors down, but I guess open the whiskey up a lot more and get those flavors coming through. And that citrus, as I say, as soon as I put water in there, I went, wow, yeah, that's like a bit of pith and zest, which is absolutely great.
Yeah,
So
totally.
it's delicious. So yeah, I need to try and get into the warehouses up there. Actually, I'm surprised how big the warehouses are up there.
What, a Mannochmore?
Yeah. So a couple 100,000 casks.
Blimey. I bet they're not just storing Mannochmore and Glenlossie there either. I bet there's all sorts of bits and pieces.
Well, I was going to say you know what we're like. I mean, no, absolutely not. I mean, there'll be a lot of crossovers and things that'll be going on, and I don't doubt that there's some crazy hidden whiskies in there that I have no idea how rackage and dunnage and how you computerize and file all that and figure out what's where. I mean, I was going to say that's one of our smaller sites. There's 200,000 casks in it, but I can imagine that hidden in the back there's going to be some crazy whiskies that will be hiding away, that one day we'll stumble upon. And I was going to make a joke and say throw it into a blend. Hopefully they come out as a special release and we get to taste something really, really special.
When you start talking about casks and distilleries and bottle numbers and everything, it's like when someone describes how many stars there are in the universe. You're like, well, you get about 200 bottles from one barrel. Whoa.
Mhm.
And then there's 200,000 barrels in one distillery. Whoa.
Yeah.
And then there's 130 distilleries at Diageo, and you're like, what the hell? And then, then of course you get into all the distilleries around the world as well, and you're like, Jesus, there's a lot of whiskey in the world.
Yeah, I mean, what is it we say? There's 22 million casks aging in Scotland at the moment. That's 3.5 per person. I'm pretty glad that I live in Scotland, to be honest. And when you go down to Black Grange, I'm assuming you went to Black Grange when you were working at Diageo.
No, I didn't know.
Oh, really? So we've got, I think there's 6.5 million casks aging there. There's 7.5 miles worth of road. I've driven through it. It's one of the most daunting places that I've ever driven through, because it's just rows of black warehouses, and you're just like, this is crazy. But Cambus Cooperage is on the other side. It takes 25 minutes by bus to get to work. You have to park in the car park, go and sign in, get on a bus, and then travel to the Cooperage that takes 25 minutes. Most of them live a 5-minute drive away, but they have to leave 45 minutes before to make sure they're there to get the bus for the shift change. Just like an absolutely crazy operation, and like a great description. You say, it's like how many stars there are in the universe, and how do we find out what whiskey's sitting in which warehouse and where it's been moved from is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, it is incredible to keep on top of it all, and that's such a challenging task that I'm hopeful there must be thousands of barrels lying around that no one even knows exist, and that lucky people who get to visit these distilleries get to crack open and taste because no one's laid claim to them and they're not on any inventory sheet.
It'd be even better if one just fell off the back of a lorry and into the Whiskey Me warehouse, right?
Yeah, well, that'll be fine as well, yeah.
I'll make a phone call.
Listen.
I can't guarantee you that.
Yeah. TJ, look, thanks very much. Oh, actually, there was one question that I want to get up. Well, it wasn't so much a question, and I think I know what the answer is. Here we go. Will we see a Rose Isle bottle in the Flora and Fauna range? And you might want to explain what Rose Isle Distillery is, first and foremost.
Well, I guess Rose Isle is one of our huge new distilleries, right? It's absolutely colossal in size, and it is pumping whiskey out like there is no tomorrow. Will there be one in the Flora and Fauna range? I hope so, but I have absolutely no idea. I think there'll be a couple that come in special release, maybe. That's kind of going to be the first place that we see them. I mean, there's been no conversations about some of our distilleries joining the Flora and Fauna that aren't in bottle yet. So I think the idea would be I'll go and beg and ask and see who I can give a bottle of Black Label to make it happen and see what can happen. But it would be nice if there was something, right?
Sure would. I mean, the weird thing about Rose Isle, of course, is it's a bit of a chameleon distillery, isn't it? It was designed to produce multiple different types of malt whiskey, all malt whiskey, but with different flavor profiles. And so a Flora and Fauna release of Rose Isle would be interesting because it wouldn't be possible to release one whiskey that truly represents that distillery because it makes a few different types of whiskey.
Would we just combine the best of however many we've made?
Yeah.
Technically, it would still be a single malt, although we've used
I suppose
different
you would,
still sizes and different mashes and different fermentation times. Make loads of different types of whiskey and then put all that together and kind of see what we figure out. Or do we end up with a range of 12-year-olds from Rose Isle that all had different mash times, different fermentation times, different distillation processes, different casks, and then from there you've got a new Flora and Fauna range that were just under Rose Isle.
That would be interesting. Anyone who's not familiar with Distillery, which I wouldn't surprise me if you're not, because it very rarely gets talked about, you should Google Rose Isle because it's quite striking looking. It's been called the Death Star in the past because it's very futuristic, Darth Vader-esque. It actually looks
massive.
Yeah, it looks more like a Star Destroyer than a Death Star. Actually, it's not round. The Star Destroyer. It looks like the bridge of a Star Destroyer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't had a chance to go yet, and I'm weirdly scared of going just because of the sheer size of it, and it's a daunting looking building. But yeah, anyone out there, I would suggest go and have a Google of it and see, and go and have a peek. And I think it'll be one of the ones that I'm going to try and get into as soon as I can because it's such a big unit.
Yeah, I have visited there. That was I think it had only been going about a year or two when I visited, and they were struggling with it because as I say, they're trying to make all these different types of whiskey. Effectively, what they're trying to do is emulate the whiskies of other distilleries in the portfolio, like Mannochmore, for example. And they were struggling to make Clynelish. They couldn't get the waxy style to come through, which was quite sort of gratifying in a way that you can't just open a distillery and make this whiskey. There's something about that place and the configuration and whatever else goes on there that makes that whiskey taste the way it does.
And I guess at the end of the day, if we at Diageo can't replicate our own whiskies, there's no way.
No one else has got a chance.
Absolutely. And Clynelish has taken years to get to that point of its waxiness that we talk about build up of gunk, right? It's going to take a long time to be able to try and replicate that, which is phenomenal. I need to try and put a list together of distilleries that have a build up of gunk that give you that waxy tone. But I know that Blair Athol's one of the other ones that has that inside the spirit receivers, which is super cool. So
Irvin Tchaikovsky, our mutual friend, your colleague, who has been on the live stream before, he reckons Dal Ewan's producing waxy at the moment.
I think it has been for a little while. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's the one that's going to start. I was going to say making up for Clynelish because Clynelish has gone through the roof. It's becoming one of our most popular single malts, considering I guess it's new to the single malt portfolio. I did find a bottle of Clynelish Flora and Fauna 14-year-old that I was going to purchase actually and compare it to the current one and see what.
Yeah, interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the cask on a 14-year-old Flora and Fauna is. I haven't looked into it. But the 14-year-old, our regular release, of course, is a combination between American and European. But the Flora and Fauna looks a lot lighter in colour, so you would assume that it might be something a little bit more just American oaky, which would be really nice to try it. So if I do get around to that, Tristan, I'll make sure I'll recycle some of your pouches and send them down to you.
Mate, do, because Clynelish is my favourite distillery. I would like to think I'm single-handedly responsible for the huge uplift in popularity of Clynelish, because all I do is talk about it, pretty much.
I mean, it was you that got me into it, to be honest with you. I'm not going to lie about that.
Cool. Well, yeah, mate, if you get hold of the Flora and Fauna 14, let's make sure we do that for sure, because, love that juice. Cool. Look, thank you so much for your time. we've gone on a while. That might even be record length, I think.
Oh,
Which
really?
is
God, I beat the time that Colin Dunn was here. You'll come
yeah,
back.
I know it's
No problem.
no mean feat, but as a testament to your good chat, we've managed to hold on to 35 people still watching, so that's pretty good effort, I'd say.
That's great. Well, thank you for having me, and congratulations on the big move, and coming on to Whiskey Me for me has been like quite a big thing, because you've had some superstars on there, and now I'm here, so I guess that pulls me up a rank at least.
Mate, for sure. You are a superstar yourself, and we'll have you back on in the future, hopefully, if you'll come. Maybe you can be our flora and fauna expert, actually.
We'll
And
see what I can do. We'll go hunting for some more.
all right, listen, thanks so much, TJ, and we'll
Yes,
see you all next time. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye.
cheers.